mode.
Welcome to the webinar, taking the first steps to building wealth. My name is Tim Tormone, Associate Executive Director of Engagement and Outreach, and we appreciate the over 400 Terps that may be on this webinar today. Our presenter is Terp alumni Mark Jukowitz, and he is a favorite presenter of ours here at the Alumni Association. Mark started his career as a financial advisor with ING Financial Partners in Virginia. Early on, Mark developed a passion for helping people reach their goals. As a financial planner, Mark seeks to understand each client's unique situation and aspirations in order to create a durable and comprehensive plan that is appropriately tailored to each client's needs. Mark played Division I lacrosse for the University of Maryland, where he graduated with a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics. He obtained his life, health, disability, and long-term care insurance licenses during his senior year on campus, and upon graduating, he promptly became FINRA Series 7 and 66 registered. Today, Mark enjoys maintaining an active and healthy lifestyle. He is a defender on the roster for the first ever Israeli national lacrosse team and competes around the world while also donating his time and efforts to help develop the sport of lacrosse in Israel and coach a 5th grade traveling lacrosse team from Bethesda. Before I turn over the webinar to Mark, please note that you may ask Mark a question by typing it in the questions box on your side toolbar. However, with over 400 people expected to be on this webinar, there may be a lot of questions. We will get to as many of them as we possibly can. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to all of you after the presentation. However, slides from the presentation will not be available, so please take notes as needed. Finally, make sure you check out our events calendar at www.alumni.umd.edu for future webinars and other fun and informative programming. With that said, Mark, take it away.
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate the time here. Thanks everybody for tuning in on their lunch break. Really appreciate that. As Tim mentioned, was a Terp, and always happy to give back and help educate my fellow alumni. So as Tim also mentioned, we do have a lot of great material to get through. So I am going to ask if everyone can please, at least I'm going to hold off answering questions until the end, but feel free to enter them in the chat box as we go so we can kind of get a queued up line there. All right. So some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today are going to range from, first and foremost, understanding your paycheck, setting goals and making plans to achieve those goals, creating a budget and how to create a budget, credit cards versus loans, what are the differences and the advantages, student debt, what options are out there for you, reasons for saving, as well as understanding the power of compounding interest over time. We're also going to go over some basic asset classes to help you begin investing. And we're also going to talk about some of the types of different retirement accounts and some of the general best practices moving forward for everybody to start to take those first steps towards building wealth. So hopefully everybody's on here and listening in for pretty much the same basic reason, and that would be to gain financial knowledge. I really do commend you for at least taking this step because having a strong base of financial knowledge will not only enable you to understand important financial concepts, but also help you become financially independent and self-reliant. It'll also help you to see the possibilities for the future and help in really determining what your specific financial needs are. And lastly, it'll help you learn really how to control your money so it ultimately doesn't end up controlling you. So in terms of getting started, and this is a pretty high-level, type of planning here, but so often I see young people that just don't sit down and think of exactly what they want to do with their money. So whether you're out of school and starting your career, making a career change, or starting a family, it's important to define what those short and long-term financial goals actually specifically are. Now that can be anything from paying off debt, saving for a down payment on a new home, saving for kids' college, or ultimately retirement. So the first step is really defining those goals. Now the next step would be to make plans to reach those goals. Now again, I know that's extremely high level, but you need to first get organized and get a clear picture of where you currently are today. From there, you can set small and achievable goals to help you actually implement your plan and stay on track. Finally, as you progress, you'll want to track your progress and be aware of the different risks as you go and make sure to make changes as your situation is probably going to change along the way. So again, I know that was extremely high level. We're going to kind of dig a little bit deeper into each one of these pieces. So first and foremost, let's talk briefly. This is probably going to be a review for most of you, but quickly understanding the different parts of your paycheck. So, on the bottom left portion on this example here, and every pay stub might look a little bit different, you're going to see gross pay. Now, gross pay is the amount of money that you earn in that pay period before anything is taken out, before taxes, before withholdings, before any benefits. That's what we call your gross pay. You can see that in the total earnings section on the bottom left there. On the top right, you'll see the taxes section. Typically, when you earn money and you're paying taxes and you have taxes withheld, you are paying money to the federal government, the state government, as well as 2 federal insurance programs, Social Security and Medicare. So the federal taxes that you pay to the federal government help fund various parts of the federal budget, such as defense spending and federal employee pay. The state taxes that you pay to your local state government help fund local things like repairing local infrastructure, as well as local public schools. Social Security is an insurance program that provides benefits to retired people, unemployed folks, as well as individuals with disabilities. Your taxes do help fund this program. Medicare is also a federal system of health insurance for people aged 65 and older, as well as certain young people with disabilities. Your taxes do also help fund this program. So then you'll see net pay or net income on the bottom right here in this example. Now that's the amount of money you've earned during the pay period after all your taxes have been taken out. Sometimes that can be a little bit painful to look at, obviously, seeing how much you are paying. But that is the amount of money you actually take home from your paycheck. It's commonly referred to as take-home pay or your net pay, or really what you see hitting your bank account each 2 weeks or every month. So after-tax income is really the important number we're going to look at here that you're going to use to help build your own specific budget. Also, folks who do contribute and are fortunate enough to have a company 401k or other retirement plan, in the taxes or withholdings in the deductions section there in the middle is where you would see a 401k contribution, or if you're paying a portion of your health insurance, you might also see that in the deductions. So as I mentioned, the first essential step to take in this process should really be to get a clear understanding of where you are today. So how much after-tax income do you have each month? How much do you spend each month? Do you have debt? If so, how much? What type of debt? Do you have an emergency fund that can cover up to 6 months of living expenses? How much do you have saved currently? Where is it? What types of accounts is it in? So the next step in getting to being able to clarify where you are today is really to create some sort of budget to help you understand what's coming in each month, what's going out each month, and is there a gap that I can use as a resource to work towards achieving my goals. So oftentimes going through this healthy financial budget checkup and creating a budget can help find dollars that were simply just slipping through the cracks. I know this has helped a lot of my clients keep a better eye on their expenses while still making sure they're able to save today. So first and foremost, I'm going to go over in this slide how to create a what I would call more of a traditional budget. So a budget is simply an estimate of your income and expenses for a set period of time. Here are 5 pretty basic steps to help you create a traditional budget that works for your situation. So first and foremost, you want to write down your financial goals, as we talked about. It's a lot easier to get off track if you don't have something you're working towards. I would definitely encourage at this point including a savings goal as well as an ultimate goal of accumulating X amount of dollars. Next, you want to track your income for a month, or simply check your pay stubs. This will give you an estimate of how much you actually take home each month, like we just talked about. Once you have an idea of how much money you're taking in on an after-tax basis, then you want to track your expenses for a month. Now, this is really the most important step to creating a budget. You really, really cannot let any dollars slip through the cracks. Every latte, every Uber ride, every Chipotle burrito you buy. You really do have to keep track of it. Now, there's a couple easier and simpler ways to keep track as opposed to just writing down every time you buy something. It's obviously a little bit tedious. There's tools like mint.com that you can link your accounts to, and it'll give you, clean reports of what you spend money on. I think Capital One and I think Bank of America also have their own proprietary, budgeting software, or you can just go through your own credit card or debit card statements and just see what you bought. But you want to have a good, clear idea and I would say a conservative idea on how much you need to spend. So if you need to spend $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month, maybe add 200 to that or 300 to that, because every month's going to be a little bit different. From there, you want to create spending categories if possible. So you want to split your expenses into necessity items and luxury items. Necessities are obviously rent, groceries, car payments, insurances, or bills. Luxuries would be more so dining out, entertainment, extra trips to Starbucks, you name it. And to be safe, I would really include your savings goal as a necessary item as opposed to a luxury item. That way, you're much less likely to sacrifice saving for some of those luxury items. You can also use Excel to do this. If you're pretty handy with it, it can be really easy and nice to play around with the different calculators. You can also color code your expenses so that you can see which are luxury, which are necessity, but you don't have to. And lastly, number 5, evaluate your budget. So this is really the final step in preparing a budget. Take a good look at your expenses. Do you see numerous luxury items you can either scale back on or simply just live without? That's really where a lot of my clients have found some significant monthly savings. And as a general rule of thumb, it might be a good idea to evaluate and compare your budget with your actual expenses about every 3 months. That way you can also track things like seasonal changes in heating costs or other spending habits that you might have seasonally. Not doing so can result in overspending or lack of savings, as well as just in general delaying your financial goals. So I just talked about a traditional budget. But really, I want to talk now a little bit more about what I call the 60% solution, which is an alternative budgeting strategy that helps facilitate savings in a way that I think is more sustainable and a little bit easier to stick with than a traditional budget where you keep track of every single expense. So as I said, the 60% is a budgeting guideline and helps you not have to account for every dollar you spend. So the whole reason why people budget and why we budget is to control overspending, prevent unnecessary debt, and help you save more. So it starts with trying to keep your committed or necessary expenses at or below about 60% of your gross take-home income. Committed expenses can be just the way we talked about necessity items. So that's food, household expenses, rent, mortgage, taxes. Now, 60% is by no means a magic number. It's a workable goal to think about as a guideline. Depending on your situation, that number could be lower, could be a bit higher, but at any rate, 60% is a good place to try and start. Now, the key here is that the remaining 40% of your income each month is divided into 4 chunks of roughly 10% each. You've got retirement savings, which could be entirely consisting of your 401k contribution. Now, this can be simple. It comes right off of your paycheck. This could also be a Roth IRA if you qualify. Then you have long-term savings. So this portion would not be money that would go into a retirement account per se, where you're penalized if you take an early withdrawal. But this could be a brokerage account where you can invest, but it's liquid enough so that in a pinch you could sell securities and have that cash on hand to use. You've also got short-term savings, and that's typically more tilted for irregular expenses. Now that could be just simply a savings account. This money should be liquid. You should be able to access it easily. You should be able to transfer it to a checking account using the web or a bank app. And over the course of the year, this money could be used to pay for things like vacations, repairs, holiday gifts, really irregular but more or less somewhat predictable expenses. Then you've got your fund money. Your fund money you can spend on anything you want during the month as long as it does not exceed 10% of income. So the key to the 60% solution is that you automate the 40% first. So on the left side, those 10% chunks, you would set up direct deposit where 10% would go into one of those accounts automatically, out of sight, out of mind is the way I like to think of it. Where people do kind of fall short with this method is where they don't make those provisions for saving automatically first. And if you are carrying a substantial amount of non-mortgage debt, which could be a student loan or a car note, you could use 20% that might otherwise go towards retirement and long-term savings to aggressively pay down that debt. You could also reduce some of the fund money as well. Remember, every dollar in interest that you don't pay in interest is just like getting a guaranteed, risk-free, tax-free return on your money equal to that interest rate on the debt. And then when the debts are paid off, you want to immediately redirect that money into savings. So now that we've gone through budgeting, let's talk about credit and loans. So credit cards are really essential when building credit as well as when just generally building wealth. Credit allows you to buy goods or services before you actually pay. based on the trust that payment will be made in the future. Now, there are two types of credit. You have credit cards or lines of credit, and then you have loans. Now, the big difference is that with a line of credit or a credit card, you have access to a specified amount of money, a credit limit. You only need to repay what you spend plus interest. Now, with a loan, you receive all of the borrowed money at once and then are then responsible for paying back that full amount plus any interest accrued. So as we just talked about, credit cards allow you to buy now and agree to pay later. Now, again, you have a credit limit, which you can make purchases up to that limit, not beyond. So again, it's extremely important. A credit card is not free money. It's a loan that must be paid back. Again, that might be a review for most folks, but I know credit cards can be somewhat tricky when you start to, having your first one. Credit cards can be paid back in full or periodic installments. If you do pay it back in full, you get charged no interest. However, if you do need time to make payments, you will be charged interest at a specified rate until it is paid off. So let's take a hypothetical example here. So let's say you decide to buy a shirt and new shoes. Not sure where this person was shopping that they got a shirt and shoes for just 70 bucks these days, but let's just go with it. So say you decide to use your credit card, and as the month progresses, other bills come up, cell phone, car payment. You also want to be sure you can still go out to, eat with your friends. So this month you miss your monthly credit card payment. So then interest builds on that $70 purchase. Next month, that shirt and shoes now cost $95, depending on whatever interest rate you have on that credit card, of course. As you see, it's important to pay your credit card bill on time and in full so that you don't keep accumulating interest and paying more for the goods that you buy. Now, let's talk about interest rates. Interest rates with credit cards tend to be extremely, extremely high. Currently, I think they're averaging right around 17.5%. They can be as high as 25%. An important thing to remember about interest rates is that they also may fluctuate with the market, so it's important to keep an eye on your interest rate even after you've gotten and used your card. So one of the most important things to consider when making a charge on a credit card is that you will be charged interest if you don't pay it off in full each month. I hate to keep beating a dead horse, but that really is crucial to understand. Interest typically begins 1 month after the purchase is made, as I mentioned, and borrowing limits are again preset based on your credit rating. So as you evaluate credit cards and eventually go with one, make sure you do shop around. There's a website called nerdwallet.com. That's a fantastic resource in comparing the different types of credit cards for what you might be looking for. You want to make sure you read the fine print. You want to pay your bill in full each month. Track your spending to make sure that you're not spending too much and that you have the money to pay it off. Pay attention to any changes in your credit agreement. That could be a rate change, could be terms, but you want to make sure you do read those updated emails. On the flip side, you want to make sure that you do not spend money you don't have. You do not want to reach your maximum credit limit. I know it can be tempting, but you don't want to get store credit cards for discounts at the counter, just for the discount, like a Macy's card or a Nordstrom's card. Now, if that's the card that makes sense for you, that's a different story, but if you're getting it just to get that extra 10 or 15% off at the time, I would really, really advise against that. Applying for more credit cards if you have balances on others, that's definitely something you should try to avoid if you can, as well as, of course, giving your credit card to someone else. If you're like me, you've probably gotten credit card applications in the mail pretty much constantly from tons of different companies, and it can be enticing when you see a big bonus of 50,000 miles or 100,000 miles or cash back or whatever they're offering, but it is super, super important to have a handle on the number of credit cards you maintain. If you start opening up credit cards left and right, it can be really, really easy to lose track, which can be pretty detrimental in terms of if you start accruing interest and defaulting on payments. So we talked about credit a little bit, but as I mentioned, a loan is a sum of money that must be paid back over time. Loans typically tend to be for larger purchases. It could be for a car, college or grad school, as well as a home mortgage. Now, most mortgages come from private lenders. However, student loans can come from both private lenders as well as the federal government. Student loans from private institutions do tend to have a higher interest rate than loans from the government, but there are limits to how much you can borrow from the government. We're going to get into student loans in just a minute. But first, let's talk about cars. So, when you go to buy a car, you've got options. You can buy a car, you can lease a car, and buying a car can be a great investment when you do it in a way that best suits your own financial situation. So when you are deciding between buying or leasing a car, you really do want to run the numbers and consider both options carefully in respect especially to your budget. Some of the questions you can ask yourself is, do you have good credit? How much can you afford on a down payment? How often do you want to get a new car? How much do you plan to drive it? How well do you treat your car? As well as how stable is your income? As I said, you never want to enter into any lease or loan agreement without having stable income and a budget. Doing so can seriously hurt your credit if you do default. So regardless whether or not you buy or lease, you want to make sure that your monthly cash outlay for this is appropriate and fits the budget that we talked about earlier. All right, some of our favorite topics. Let's talk about student loans now. So we've talked about car loans, and really student loans are something that so many people in our generation are currently dealing with. Probably many or most of you on the call today have some sort of student loan or have had some sort of student loan. For a lot of adults, the burden of repaying that student loan is obviously daunting. But to ensure that you don't default, which can, as I mentioned, severely damage your credit score, it's necessary to tackle this debt head-on if possible. If you're enrolling in a degree program, knowing the types of loans available to you can help you down the road when it comes to the repayment portion. For those who are currently making payments on their student loan debt, a bit of research can go a long way to really helping you ease that burden. For example, if you work in public service, some or all of your loans may be forgiven. If you do have to pay your loans, loan consolidation or refinancing might offer some relief. And knowing some of those different repayment options in general can help reduce your monthly payments as well. So it really is crucial to do your own research here to determine which path may make the most sense for your specific situation. With regards to refinancing and consolidating, some of these companies are some of the most competitive that I've found out there. There's SoFi, there's Earnest, there's also a website called Credible. Actually got an email the other day about how University of Maryland partnered with Credible to help refinance student loans, so that could be a great resource for all of the folks on here. So in terms of the types of loans available, before we talk loans, it really is important to exhaust all of the possible grant, scholarship, and financial aid options other than loans before you take a look at the loans. Scholarships and grants, typically neither of those need to ever be repaid. But if you're like the vast majority of students, at least part or some of your degree will most likely need to be funded with loans. So as I said, there's several types of loans. First and foremost being interest-free loans. So these loans might be available from the college itself, though not all colleges offer them. I'm actually not positive, unfortunately, if UMD did offer them or not. There's federal Perkins loans, also offered by schools. Perkins loans are only available to students that do need financial need. An undergrad can borrow up to $5,500 per year in Perkins loans, generally at a very low rate with no loan fees. Then there's direct subsidized loans, which are also available to students with financial need. Subsidized loans do not accrue interest while the student is enrolled at the school at least half-time or during a grace period after graduation. Now these loans carry a low rate, but they do have a loan fee associated. There's unsubsidized loans, which are available to students who are pursuing a degree and enrolled at least half-time. Now unsubsidized loans do not require financial need. However, they do begin to accrue interest immediately. And then that interest is what's called capitalized, so that just means it gets added to the principal. Please note, there is a limit on the dollar amount of subsidized and unsubsidized loans that are available to students. Then you've got PLUS loans. So a direct PLUS loan is available to graduate students enrolled at least half-time up to the cost of attendance. A parent PLUS loan would be available to the parents of a dependent undergraduate student enrolled at least half-time. That loan would be taken out in the parent's name, not the student's. Interest on both PLUS loan types does accrue immediately as well as capitalizes, so it gets added onto the principal. These loans do generally carry a higher rate than the loans described previously, as well as a little bit larger loan fee associated with them. Then you have private loans, which are offered by banking institutions typically. Private loans are pretty viable options if the interest rate is favorable, but they do not offer the same repayment options that the federal loans offer, which we're going to get into in just a minute. So some federal loans do offer forgiveness and cancellation of loans for qualified borrowers. So that is pretty exciting for folks that it does apply to. So let's get into that. So public service loan forgiveness. is an incentive program that encourages students to work in public service jobs. So if a borrower works in a qualifying public service job and makes 120 qualifying payments, the remaining balance may be forgiven. Also important to note that the amount forgiven would not be considered income for tax purposes by the IRS. There's also a teacher loan forgiveness program, which encourages students to become teachers. Borrowers who teach full-time at a qualifying school for 5 consecutive years may qualify to have as much as $17,500 in subsidized or unsubsidized loans forgiven. Additionally, teachers may qualify for a discharge of Perkins loans if they've taught at a qualifying public or nonprofit elementary or secondary school. Again, the amount canceled is not considered income for tax purposes. Federal loans can be consolidated through the Department of Education. Consolidation is used to extend a loan's repayment terms and combine several loans into one bill. Consolidations can have a loan term up to 30 years, resulting in a lower monthly payment, but it does typically increase the total amount that a borrower will repay over the life of the loan. A direct consolidation loan has a fixed interest rate calculated using the weighted average of the interest rates on the borrower's current loans and rounding up to the nearest 1/8 of 1%. Private companies like the ones I listed earlier have begun to offer borrowers the ability to refinance both private and federal student loans at lower rates, but keep in mind that refinancing might eliminate some of the options you get available with federal loans, such as an income-based repayment plan, forgiveness programs, forbearance, as well as deferment. So you want to make sure you understand some of those unintended consequences of refinancing student debt. So let's talk about the different repayment options you might have available to you. Federal loans typically offer a variety of these repayment options to help borrowers manage those payments. The standard repayment plan calls for fixed payments for up to 10 years, depending on the dollar amount of the loans. Because this has the shortest term, it typically accrues the least interest. Then there's the graduated repayment plan, which offers gradually increasing payments for up to 10 years. This option accrues more interest than the standard plan, but it can be good for students who are just starting out their careers. Then there's the extended repayment plan, which offers either fixed or graduated payments for up to 25 years. It results in a lower monthly payment, but more interest over the life of the loan. A newer option that's come out recently has been the income-based repayment plan. Under this plan, the student's maximum payment is 15% of his or her discretionary income, and that changes as his or her income changes. So the term is 25 years, and to qualify, the student must have a partial financial hardship. Generally, this means that the student's federal student loan debt must be higher than his or her annual discretionary income, or represent a significant portion of his or her annual income. For relatively newer borrowers, so that's borrowers with loans that incurred on or after July 1st, 2014, the term for the income-based repayment plan is 20 years, and the maximum payment is limited to 10% of discretionary income. Payments will be lower than for the standard repayment plan, but more interest accrues over the life of the loan. If after 25 years of payments, the student still has an outstanding balance, that balance will be forgiven. However, the student will have to pay income taxes on the forgiven amount, unlike the teacher as well as the public service situation we talked about. The most recently introduced payment plan option is the pay-as-you-earn plan. So similar to the income-based plan, its maximum monthly payments are only 10% of discretionary income, and the repayment term is 20 years. To qualify, the borrower must also have a partial financial hardship. This plan is only available to relatively newer borrowers, and the plan defines new borrowers differently from the income-based plan. With the pay-as-you-earn, new borrowers are defined as those who received a direct loan disbursement on or after October 1st, 2011, and have had no outstanding balances on a direct loan or federal family education loan on or after October 1st, 2007. Just as with the income-based plan, the balance is forgiven after the repayment term, and the amount forgiven is taxed as income. Finally, there's the income contingent repayment plan, which is similar to the pay-as-you-earn and income-based plans, except that the payment is always based on income. Even if a borrower's income does not qualify him or her for a partial financial hardship, the monthly payment depends on income and family size, and the term is typically 25 years. Just like the income-based plan, the balance is forgiven after the repayment term, and the amount forgiven is also taxed as income. So now that everyone is nice and depressed thinking about their student loans, let's talk about something a little bit more positive. Let's talk about savings. So saving money is really the most important thing you can possibly do at this point. It's so important to pay yourself first and put earned money into either a savings or an investment account for future use, for things such as an emergency fund, car payment, or college. Savings allows you to make purchases and, more importantly, helps ensure that you have funds in the future in the case of an emergency. Now, we've all heard, the saying, save for a rainy day. We never know when or really what or how bad those rainy days are going to be. That could be an unforeseen car expense, transmission might go, job loss, or any other moment where you might need a large amount of money. Maybe you owe more taxes than you assumed. That's why it's so important to save and be prepared. In order to help you save money, you have to have some sort of savings goals, which would then correspond to your budget earlier. So with savings accounts as well as investment accounts, typically you earn interest. And let's talk about compounding interest. Timing really, really is everything. Now, I'm not 100% positive who said this quote, but the rich are not rich just because they earn a lot of money. The rich are rich because they save a lot of money. I think that is brilliant. Albert Einstein was also quoted saying that compounding interest is the eighth wonder of the world. Let's explore why I actually can't agree more with that statement. So here we go. We've got a hypothetical example. We've got Amy on the left. We've got John on the right. Amy starts to invest at age 25. She invests $300 a month or $3,600 a year for the next 15 years until she's 40. Hypothetically speaking, let's say she got a rate of return of 8% annually on that investment. Now, that might be high, that might be low, depending on what you're investing in. I'd say that's a little bit on the higher end, but again, this is more of a hypothetical example here. So she invested $54,000 total over 15 years. At age 40, she would have an account balance of $104,500. At age 70, if she did not contribute at all for another 30 years, but just let that grow, she would have an account balance of $1,050,000. John, on the other hand, started a little bit later. He was, enjoyed spending his money earlier on, and he started to invest at the age of 40. He invested the same $300 a year or a month or $3,600 a year, obtained the same interest rate at 8%, and he invested a total of $108,000 over 30 years. At age 70, John would have an account value of $450,000. Now you can see that's pretty powerful in the sense that Amy only contributed $54,000, half of what John put in, yet at the same age over the same amount of time, or not with the same amount of time, but at the same age, she had more than double the amount that John did with less saved simply by giving herself more time to let that interest compound on itself. Ideally, you would start saving for retirement early and not stop until you retire, but even if you can only contribute to your retirement plan for a short time during your younger years, it's still far more beneficial than waiting until you're older. But let's see what would have happened if Amy didn't stop contributing after 15 years and if she started a little bit younger. So let's say she started investing at age 20, and let's say instead of $3,600 a year, she was able to invest $5,000 a year for 45 years until she was 65. Saying she got the same rate of return at 8%, she would have invested a total of $225,000. At age 65, with compounding interest, she would now have an account value of $1.93 million. She would have saved roughly $900,000 more than in that first example if she didn't stop. So make saving a priority and start as young as you can. Every year you put it off really, really does make a difference. Now, a lot of you guys might be thinking, retirement is so far in the future, maybe it's 20, 30, even 40 years out. But it's important to know why you save for retirement. So, first and foremost, we're living longer. In today's day and age with technology and with medicine progressing the way it is at the rate it is, there's new breakthroughs constantly almost every year. So people are just generally living longer. So you're going to have to make that income last for a longer period of time. Social Security reserves may be drying up. We'll also be keeping a close eye on it with the current administration, see if they make any changes to that program. But just in general, reserves are on track to potentially be drying up. Compounding is more beneficial over time, as we just saw in that example. You also might not be able to save later if and when your family expenses start to increase. And in general, who knows if you're going to be able to save later, because we all have things that come up. You know, transmission might go, you know, something might break in the house, whatever it might be. You know, unexpected things are going to happen, and you're going to have to account for them along the way. So the earlier you can save, the more prepared you are, and the better on track you'll be. So some general best practices in terms of saving. You know, save early, save often is kind of the mantra I like to, you know, talk to my clients with. First and foremost, you want to establish a target cash reserve. Typically, that could be up to 3 to 6 months of your after-tax expenses. Now, that would correspond to your budget. I would say folks who have an incredibly stable job situation with a steady paycheck could err a little bit more on the lesser side towards that 3-month range. Folks who might make commissions or are, you know, in a less stable environment would probably want to err on the side of having more cash on hand towards that 6 months or more of expenses. You want to take advantage of employer-sponsored plans if you are fortunate enough to have one available to you. That could be a 401k, 403b if you're a teacher or professor. It could also be a 457 plan. All very similar employer-sponsored plans. If you can, you want to try to also max fund or $5,500 put into a Roth IRA each year. That's going to be future tax-free dollars, which we're going to talk about a little bit later on. And you want to automate it if possible. You know, I found that automation really, really helps. So if you have it coming out of your bank account at a set date every time, you know you don't have to write a check or make a call or hit a button, because life's going to get in the way. You're not always, unfortunately, going to make that decision to save it, at least in my experience with some of my clients. If you automate it, it's out of sight, out of mind, and you know you're taking the right steps towards building wealth. And this is another one that I use with some of my clients. It doesn't work for everybody, but I'm a competitive person. As Tim mentioned, I play sports. I've always played sports. So I like to challenge and compete with myself to save more each month, as well as challenge my clients to save more each month. So if you're able to save $300 this month, next month try and save $350 or $400. Make a game out of it. You're really going to be the only one winning. So this might be a review for some folks, but for those who are not familiar with how, you know, a 401k account as well as different IRAs work, let's take a quick moment to review some of the differences and why all 3 types of accounts offer such a great opportunity to save for retirement. On the left, we've got a 401k. That's typically an employer-sponsored account. It offers ease and convenience. So what that means is that if you ever contributed to one, you know that this money leaves your paycheck before any taxes are taken out, automatically gets deposited and invested every pay period. Employers can offer a potential match, which is the best rate of return you'll ever get. So if you have an employer that will match you, 5% for every 5% of your income that you put in, please, please, please take advantage of that match. It's free money. The way that 401ks work, they're made with what are called pre-tax contributions. So you don't pay any income taxes on those contributions the year you make the money. When it goes into this type of account, you get what's called tax-deferred growth. So you don't pay taxes every year on the interest or the capital gain. However, when you do go to take that money out in retirement, every dollar is going to be fully taxable at ordinary income rates. Important to understand the ramifications of that. Also, the investment choices are typically simplified. So what that means is you are limited most of the time to mutual funds, and not only just mutual funds, but typically a select menu of funds that could be 10, 20, 50, or 100 funds, which can be a good thing for a lot of folks. It makes things a little bit easier, a little bit more simplified. Also, 401ks offer disciplined savings, as we talked about. Every pay period, that money is getting saved and invested. Dollar cost averaging is a concept of buying into the market every month at the same time. Sometimes you buy high, sometimes you buy low, but over the long term, typically, on average, you will buy in lower. It's a good best practice for saving and investing. In the middle, we've got traditional or rollover IRAs. Now, these type of accounts can be used to consolidate old 401ks. If you've had a few different employers and you've got a couple old 401ks out there, you could roll them over and consolidate them into one traditional or rollover IRA. They're taxed the exact same way as 401ks, so it's pre-tax contributions typically. You get the same tax-deferred growth, so you don't pay annually on the interest or the capital gain. However, again, just like with the 401k, every dollar you take out in retirement from that account is going to be fully taxable at ordinary income rates. Again, that is very important to understand. Since you've never paid taxes on 401k or traditional IRA, Uncle Sam's going to get his money one way or the other. The biggest difference between the IRA and the 401k is that you have unlimited investment options within an IRA. That means you could invest in individual stocks, mutual funds, ETFs, alternative investments, real estate investment trusts, annuities. You really do have the world of investments at your fingertips, which can be somewhat overwhelming for some folks, or for others it can be, much easier for them to build the portfolios that they're looking for. For folks who do work with an advisor, it's typically a big advantage. That way we're really able to add value. Lastly, we've got Roth IRAs. So Roth IRAs are made with after-tax contributions. So you pay income taxes the year you make the money, gets put into this type of account. You get the same tax-deferred growth, so you don't pay any interest or capital gains each year. The biggest difference is that these are going to be tax-free withdrawals. So once the money gets into a Roth IRA or a Roth 401k, you never pay taxes again on those dollars. It's going to be future tax-free money like we talked about. However, that sounds great, right? Why wouldn't everyone want a Roth IRA? The IRS does impose income limits to prevent a lot of different people from contributing into a Roth IRA. So if you're filing single, if you make around $120,000 a year, you are not eligible to contribute to a Roth IRA. If you're filing jointly and you make roughly about $190,000 as a household, then your household would not be, those individuals would not be able to contribute to a Roth IRA. That does not mean you have to forfeit previous year's contributions. You can, of course, still maintain that account. You just would not be able to make that contribution in the given year. So a couple critical numbers to think about when you think about retirement accounts. You got a couple different ages. So with 401ks and traditional IRAs, age 59 and a half, it's a big one. If you want to take money out of your 401k or your IRA prior to age 59 and a half, you have to pay a 10% penalty. Likewise, since you've never paid taxes on this money before, at age 70 and a half, you have to take what are called required minimum distributions, or RMDs. That's going to force the money out of the account and force you to pay taxes because, as I said, Uncle Sam's going to find a way to get his. You also have limits. So with 401k and IRAs, or with 401k, you can contribute $17,500 a year. If you are over the age of 50, you can have another catch-up. Or I believe it's $18,000 this year. I just want to apologize for that. With IRAs, both Roth as well as traditional, you can contribute $5,500 per year, as well as another $1,000 if you are over the age of 50 for catch-up. Next, I want to talk briefly about some of the basic different asset classes, and this is probably going to be a refresher for most of you. First and foremost, you have cash and short-term instruments, which are designed to be liquid. The value typically does not fluctuate. It's got very little risk, but also in turn, very little upside, if any. So if you think about the rate you get on your bank account, maybe it's 0.01%. If that, it's been extremely minimal recently. When you buy a bond, you're actually purchasing an IOU. So you're lending money to whomever issued or sold you that bond. That can be a company, a city, or a government entity. When you purchase a bond, you're actually loaning that entity money for a specific amount of time. That entity is going to pay you periodic interest payments and repay your principal at the bond's maturity. Bonds are meant to be a stabilizer in an investment portfolio, so they typically target a modest return anywhere between 1% to 4%. They can be higher, but it's important to remember bonds can also lose value as well. They are not guaranteed. When you buy a stock, you're actually buying a share of ownership in the given company. So that could be quite literally buying Facebook or Apple. As an owner, if the company grows financially, you benefit. If the company loses money, you'll also be affected. Stock prices are affected by market conditions, geopolitical conditions, and they can be very volatile when thinking in the short term. They can also be affected by tweets these days. The important point to understand is that each class offers a certain degree of return potential and a corresponding level of risk. So as we saw, cash, low risk, low return. Bonds, a little bit more moderate risk, a little bit more moderate potential for return. Stocks, much higher risk, but also much higher return potential. And typically over the long runs, stocks have been the highest performers. So we're starting to wrap up here, and I just want to first thank you guys for staying on with me, but then kind of go through a couple quick best practices and resources moving forward for you. You want to have a budget. You want to include a savings plan. You need to have an established cash reserve for emergency situations. You do want to limit the number of credit cards and make sure you keep a handle on that. you really, really want to pay off those cards each month, as I mentioned earlier, to avoid that interest accruing. You want to make your payments on time. Only borrow what you can afford. Use those retirement plans offered by employers if you are fortunate enough to have it and actually contribute to it. Take advantage of that match, as I said. You want to make level-headed financial decisions moving forward, just in general. Some of the resources that I referenced today, got nerdwallet.com for the credit cards. SoFi, Earnest, and Credible are all digital technology companies where you can refinance or consolidate student debt. And I hate to end on somewhat of a negative note, but here are just a few of the bigger mistakes to avoid. Not having a budget or a savings plan, not having any cash on hand for emergencies, opening too many credit cards and not paying them off each month, making late payments, borrowing or taking loans bigger than you can afford, not using those easy-to-use retirement plans offered by your employer, watching the market daily and watching the headlines on CNBC and really allowing your emotions to govern your financial decisions. That is huge. I didn't really get to talk about the impact that can have on somebody's success, but really one of my biggest jobs as a financial advisor is to help save my clients from themselves and making bad decisions in the face of emotions. So I know that was a ton of material. Again, I want to thank everybody so much for sticking with me through it. If there are any questions, we can absolutely take some now, and I want to thank Tim for having me on here.
Great. Thanks, Mark. You did a great job. I learned a few things, and I am near retirement age, so it's good to know a few of these things. We do have some questions, and this one was asked by numerous people, but it's basically, can you differentiate the difference? Can you tell us the difference between retirement savings and long-term savings, or are they the same thing?
That's a great question, and there is a difference. So retirement savings means that you're saving into a designated retirement account. So that means if it's going into a 401k, if it's going into an IRA, IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account. Now that's a traditional or a Roth. So if you remember those three columns we went over, if it's a 401k, traditional, or any type of IRA, it's going to be a retirement account, which is then subject to retirement account rules, which means you cannot take any money out of there prior to age 59 and a half. Otherwise, you have to pay a 10% penalty. So you can take money out early, but you have to pay a big 10% penalty along with the taxes. Long-term savings, on the flip side, you don't get penalized for taking money in and out. So that could be just a general savings account or just a taxable brokerage account, an investment account that is not labeled as a 401k or IRA. Hopefully that makes sense.
Great. This question was also asked by numerous people, and I'm paraphrasing, but what's best for saving for retirement, stocks or a Roth IRA?
So that's an interesting question because they're very different. So think about the type of account as simply just the shell. So a 401k, a savings account, an IRA, or a Roth IRA. Those are not actually any type of investment. Those are just the type of account it is labeled for tax purposes. So a Roth IRA and stocks, you can actually invest in stocks inside of your Roth IRA. So the Roth IRA is not an investment, nor is a traditional IRA, nor is a 401k. The actual investment vehicle that's going to help increase those dollars is going to be either a mutual fund or an individual stock or a bond fund. So you would own stocks within a Roth IRA. And I think for folks on the younger side who have a long time horizon, maybe 20 or 30 years, I would definitely say stocks make a lot of sense. Individual stocks, however, can be pretty risky when you pick one specific company. So I would probably err more on the side of a stock fund where you get a professional manager who buys a lot of different stocks inside that fund. A little bit more diversified, can smooth that ride out. But back to the original question, it's not one or the other. I would say stocks, more so than bonds, would be better to invest in for younger folks who do have a longer time horizon.
Great. Also paraphrasing from a couple of people, does closing a bank account affect your credit?
So closing accounts typically does affect your credit, and I didn't really talk too much into credit scores today. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time to really hit on everything that I wanted to. Closing accounts does sometimes have a slight effect. If it's just a bank account and not a credit card, it might not have an effect because it's not a line of credit. Closing a credit card account will definitely have an effect on your credit score. Might be 10 points, might be 20 points. Typically, it's not very dramatic, and you can usually remake that up in a few years. Bank accounts can go either way. I would really, make sure you check your credit score if and when you do that.
Great. If married and filing separately, do you follow the $125,000 limit or $190,000 limit for the Roth IRA income limit?
That's a great question. So I'm going to premise my answer with I am not a CPA, I am not an accountant, and I'm not, allowed or prohibited, or I'm not really able to give tax advice since that is somewhat of a tax question. What I can say is my best guess would be if you're filing separately and you're filing as an individual but married, I would refer to the IRS website. I can't give, unfortunately, since I'm not licensed as a CPA, I can't give that advice, but I would definitely reference the IRS website. It should be pretty clear on there.
Great, thank you. The next question is, sorry, I lost it. When should someone consider refinancing a student loan?
So if you find, there's really no right or wrong answer to that question. I would say if the payments are becoming, a little bit too high and it's unmanageable in regards to how much you're making in your budget, that would definitely be a great time to take a look at some of those websites and, just see what the options are. I would honestly say, also if you have a high interest rate, and high is relative. So, I'm not going to throw numbers out there, but if you're really more than you think you should be, and that could be, hypothetically speaking, 10% or more, I would definitely consider taking a look at refinancing because that'll lower your monthly payments and save you money. But I think looking at refinancing is a good idea for anybody who has student loans. If you want to lower your payments, if you want to lower the amount that you're going to pay over the lifetime of the loan, why not take a look at what the options are out there? Whether or not you move forward and actually do the refinance is obviously up to you when you see what it looks like. But I think it would be ill-advised to not at least take a look at what the options are out there for you.
Okay. Had a couple of people ask the question, what is your opinion about Betterment, which I'm assuming is a website? Is this a good tool for investment for beginners?
Yep. So Betterment is what's called a robo-advisor. So that means it is an online website with an algorithm that is doing the investment, the rebalancing for you. I think robo-advisors in general, Betterment included, are a great tool for young investors who are just starting out saving. I think they have a nice place. I think they offer a lot of value for young investors with not a ton of money. I will say as you do really accumulate money and start to build that account, obviously, and I'm completely biased here, of course, because I am a financial advisor, but really that is where advisors like myself do really add value is, once you do start to accumulate a significant amount of money. So on the earlier side, on the younger side, I'd say definitely take advantage of some of those robos out there. Betterment, there's Wealthfront, some of the different institutions are coming out with their own. As I said before, I think they're great for young investors starting out. As your situation becomes a little bit more sophisticated and complex and you have more assets to work with, I would be a little bit hesitant of those types of services because not all of them come with human interaction and a human advisor to really help you make the best decisions in the face of emotion is the best way I could put it.
Okay.
But yeah, I think they are a great tool for folks.
Okay, I'm kind of summarizing a few questions. I think that's all the same question. So how do you prioritize if you have to pay off credit cards or a saving for a house or saving for retirement or paying off student loans? Is there some sort of prioritization that you should follow? And I apologize to those that asked all basically the same question but with different parameters on it.
No, that's a great question, and I'm glad that a lot of people were thinking about that because that is one of the biggest value adds that financial advisors provide to their clients. So when we build a financial plan, there's no one size fits all. There's no best general rule of thumb in terms of what to pay off what first. So it's going to depend on your specific situation, and it's going to depend on cash flow. So if you take a look at cash flow and you take a look at the different debts you might have, you want to evaluate, you want to always pay off the highest interest first. So that is probably going to be, if you have credit card debt, it's probably going to be the credit card debt because, as we talked about earlier, how high those interest rates can get. I hate to give blanket advice, but I would say you really want to knock that high interest debt out absolutely first. Then when you have a longer term debt like a student loan or a mortgage, I would then start to, make sure you can make those monthly payments, but instead of paying extra money towards principal to knock that debt out, I would then consider, siphoning off a portion of that savings and saving and investing it, because you don't want to focus so much on the debt for so long that now you're so far behind for retirement or college or saving for a house. So it is somewhat of a balancing act, and I would really, ask a financial advisor about your financial situation in regards to what they think makes the most sense. Unfortunately, since I don't know whose situation we're talking about or exactly what it looks like, it's really tough for me to give a specific example, a specific answer, but that's one of the big things that financial advisors really do help with.
What are safe stocks to invest in?
So I'll again preface this with no stock is safe by any means. When you invest in a stock, you have to understand no matter what, that stock can go all the way to zero and you can lose money. Every company can go out of business. We saw that in 2008 with massive institutions like Lehman Brothers. We've seen it with telecom companies. If you guys remember MCI, the Verizon Center here in DC used to be the MCI Center. They went out of business. A lot of folks lost a lot of money in that stock, and that was seen to be a safer telecom stock. So no stocks are safe. However, you can invest in more of what's called a blue chip stock. So big dominant business franchises that exactly what the business is going to look like 10 years from now, which is actually one thing that our firm specializes with. Is they're called large cap value stocks. So that could be big companies that you know of like Disney, Comcast, any large brand that you think of, like a Johnson & Johnson, a Procter & Gamble, Pepsi. Those are all big dominant companies. Now, that's not by any means saying they're safe. We just saw, I don't know if anyone watched the stock market, but Under Armour, a huge company, had a huge fall and is down about 30 to 40%. And that's a company a lot of folks thought was a relatively safe investment. But again, every stock carries risk, so that's why you want to diversify.
Okay. A couple of people asked about Roth versus traditional IRAs. I guess people have read that traditional IRAs are almost always better than Roth IRAs.
So there's no better or worse. It's really about your situation and what you think is going to happen in the future. So if you're younger and you're in a lower tax bracket now, and you think that in the future, as you continue to grow and develop your career, if you think you're going to be in a higher tax bracket down the road, then I would say it would make more sense to have Roth dollars because those are tax-free. Now, if for some reason you think you're going to be in you're making a lot of money now and tax rates are going to be lower in the future and you're going to be in a lower tax bracket in retirement, then yeah, traditional IRA would make more sense because it's all about when you pay the taxes, right? You're going to pay taxes either beforehand in the beginning with a Roth or at the end with a traditional. So if if it's really more of a balancing act, I would typically say it's good to have both. You want to have some, pre-tax money and some after-tax money so that should things change, you can be a little bit more flexible. If, taxes rise and a new administration comes in and they raise taxes, right before you go to retire, you can start pulling money from that Roth IRA in the beginning. However, likewise on the flip side, if tax rates drop and, a conservative administration comes in and they cut all the tax rates, you could start pulling income in those earlier years from your traditional or your 401k where you'd be paying the taxes. So I wouldn't say one is better or worse. They're just a little bit different. And it's about finding the right mix for what you believe is going to be your situation down the road. Again, I would say it's best to have both.
Great. And then we have time for one more question. Hopefully it's relatively quick. And it is, I graduated May 2016 and work full-time. I created a budget and started a savings plan, but I'm in school part-time to prepare for grad school, working and have to pay off out-of-pocket expenses for classes. Should I use my savings or take out a loan?
So, that's a tricky question. And again, I appreciate the description there, as detailed as the situation is. My first inclination would be, I'm personally just averse to debt. I just don't like debt. I'd rather not have it if I can avoid it. Now, that's a personal stance. That's not, advice I'm giving everybody. So personally, if it was me, I would use my savings as much as I could before having to take out for, the loan. But I would be careful that you make sure you still have a little bit of a cash buffer for emergency situations. So you don't want to use all of your spending and all of your savings on that, and then if something does happen to you or your car breaks down, now you're kind of stuck. So I would be careful to avoid, that little buffer. But above and beyond that, I would use the savings as much as you can. And then if you do have to take out loans, make sure you're, understanding the type of loans, the type of repayment options, as well as not taking out too much money in loans, because then that'll accrue, extra interest that you would otherwise not have to pay.
Great. Mark, thank you for your time. All the Terps that are still on the line, thank you for joining us today. I apologize that we did not get to all of the questions. If you do have a question for Mark, you can certainly follow up with him and get some more in-depth information, and hopefully he can help you out in some way. But I want to thank you all for attending. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and go Terps.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tim. Really appreciate it. And as Tim mentioned, I'm more than happy to have a conversation and see if I can give advice or really help out, any one of my fellow Terps.
Thank you.